Hi. We live in troubling times. The parallels with the 1930s are there for all to see. The loud nationalist slogans, the protectionism, the looming economic crisis, the scapegoating of refugees, the impatience with migrants, with democracy, and with liberalism, the empty rhetoric above unity and strong leadership and greatness as society becomes more and more deeply divided and bitterly divided. I'm an historian, so the first thing that strikes me, that strikes many of us, is we've been here before. People were no better or worse. They were no stronger or weaker in the past. So how can we avoid repeating some of those same mistakes, sliding into the same sort of organized, legitimized, legalized inhumanity to our fellow man that took place not once, not twice, but many times over the 20th century, not just in Germany, not just in Russia, but all over Europe? I think the first thing we need to understand is that none of what occurred in the past, not the genocides, not the show trials, not the forced expulsions, the concentration camps, the gulag, the gas chambers, none of this was inevitable. The First and Second World Wars were not inevitable. These were the results of individual human choices, and particularly widespread complicity, sometimes overt complicity, sometimes tacit. Our silence, our desire to conform, to keep our heads down, to stay out of trouble, this is what props up evil regimes. This is what allows them to keep power and to hold on to power. So what do we know from the past for sure? What do we know from what has happened? We know that dictatorships are not imposed overnight. Public opinion is softened up with simplistic slogans, with repeated phrases that work a bit like advertisements to link certain ideas together. Under fascism, Jewish and Bolshevik; under communism, bourgeoisie and conspiracy or reaction; today, Muslim and terrorist. These stock, repeated, simplistic phrases again and again soften us up. These ideas are not just circulated by politicians or the press, but crucially, they're repeated and circulated by us, by ordinary people. By not challenging them, we allow them to become part of our vocabulary, part of our way of thinking. And this is what gives ideas their power. It's in casual conversations and expressions of opinion. And these were what were monitored very, very carefully by the secret police in totalitarian regimes, which are monitored today by focus groups and opinion polls. These things actually do matter. We know that dictatorships normally follow some sort of plebiscite or election or referendum. Even the most oppressive regime feels the need to hold elections. They may be rigged elections, they may be limited, they may be pressured, to be sure, but they are elections. Dictators claim, they need to claim to represent the will of the people or the interests of the nation or the class. Hitler, as we all know, claimed to represent the German people in a new way that cut across social class. Stalin claimed to represent the working class. Both brought their countries to ruin or to misery. Dictatorships need to be able to claim some sort of legitimacy, some sort of mandate, in order to be able to co-opt enough people into complicity or resignation or conformity where they can't count on enthusiastic support. So we know dictatorships are not imposed all at once. We know that they do rely on public opinion, and we know that public opinion is galvanized or shaped through propaganda, especially the repeated linking of certain stock ideas, certain simplistic slogans in the media, in political speeches, which we then repeat and circulate and accept. What may be less obvious is the role that ideology plays in sustaining regimes and in silencing opposition. So in my lifetime at least, Nazism, Stalinism, which are sort of our code words for the supreme evil, these have been treated as if they were the other, as if they had nothing to do with us. They were what defines who we are through opposition. So they are the black to our white, the evil to our good, the totalitarianism to our so-called democratic values. And in fact, I think they were much more like us than it's comfortable to remember. Nasty regimes do not characteristically, literally, they do not literally force their ideas on everyone, because they don't have to. Once certain parameters have been set, ordinary people can unfortunately be relied upon to police one another, to inform upon one another, to seek to harm one another, to overtake one another, not because they necessarily have any particular interest in politics or in ideas, but because they want a pay rise or a new house, or to get even with a rival, or because they're interested in some man or woman they want to get to know better. The convenience for the regime of ideology is that it enables ordinary, perfectly ordinary, normal people, us, to justify otherwise shameful behavior in lofty terms. So it might feel instinctively wrong to denounce a Jewish neighbor whose house you want to buy at a knockdown price. But if you can claim to be purifying the Aryan race, or defending yourself against Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy, or taking back what is rightfully yours, suddenly it feels a whole lot more comfortable. Again, if you want to take the property of a small farmer and throw him into jail, that would seem cruel to anyone, unless you tell yourself that it's for the good of the working class. So ideology allows us to excuse bad behavior to ourselves. And the same, of course, applies under any political system. It can apply in a democracy. To refuse jobs or benefits or health care or entry to refugees may feel instinctively wrong until you appeal to the need to take back control of your borders or put Britain or Scotland or Wales or France or America first, to make your so-called nation great again. Suddenly your meanness doesn't sound so bad. It sounds heroic, noble, rightful. Our natural silence, our desire to conform, sometimes through fear, more oftentimes through self-interest, is what props up evil policies and evil regimes. And the opposite is also true. Our instinctive understanding, our natural connection with decency, kindness, fairness, empathy, these can prevent the implementation of evil policies. A totalitarian regime looks impenetrable from the outside. Its leaders make a big show of force. There will be uncompromising, even brutal language towards its real or imagined enemies. There will be symbolic or real violence, large military parades with state-of-the-art weapons, prisons full to bursting. There will be surveillance, control of the press, propaganda, and constant talk of the need for unity and strong leadership. These brute facts will be made palatable through a combination of populist measures. So under Hitler, there were fantastic job schemes for the unemployed. Under Mussolini, there was no litter in the streets. There was famously, the trains were made to run on time. That will be combined, those genuinely popular policies, with utopian language, and usually with scapegoating of an imaginary enemy or other. There'll be a bogeyman, Islamic terrorism, whatever happens to be convenient. But this is not where the regime's real strength lies. Regimes, even regimes that once looked as strong as Nazi Germany, built to last for 1,000 years, or as grand as the Soviet Union, supposed to be an ideal for the world to follow, they can suddenly crumble. They can suddenly lose all appearance of majesty. It's like the emperor's new clothes. The little boy pointed his finger, and at that moment, the emperor, who had been flattered and obeyed and fawned upon by everyone, suddenly looked naked and vulnerable. Evil regimes last for as long as they do because enough of us seem to profit from them, at least for a time. But the really deep underlying problem is this: the distinction between us and them, between perpetrator and victim, between oppressor and oppressed, is not rigid and not fixed. It does not divide a worthy us from an evil them. The line between the perpetrator and the victim runs within each of us. Sometimes we fall victim to injustice or cruelty. Sometimes we help by our actions or our inactions to oppress or intimidate or exclude others. Liberal democracies, when they are tolerant of difference, when they believe in taking care of the weak as well as the strong, the stranger as well as the local, that helps to protect all of us, not just from one another, but crucially, from ourselves. Ideology, propaganda, creates a climate in which everyone becomes trapped, politicians and journalists as much as voters. If all we hear about, all we repeat, is the scapegoating of a particular group, we trap our own politicians into feeling persuaded that they need to solve an imaginary problem. We do not have to think this way. We do not have to repeat or endorse cruel or degrading speech about other people. We do not have to buy newspapers or watch TV programs that peddle them. What we can do, what I would suggest that we should do, is watch our own language, consider our own use of terms, consider the truth of received ideas. And if there were one sort of takeaway method for thinking of this, I would say let's try not to think big. Let's not think in terms of nations or classes or greatness or empire or even humanity. Maybe we should think small. Maybe we should think in terms of kindness or fairness or decency. The real person in front of me, not the symbolic, imaginary person who is representing some abstraction. We can call things by their real names. We can avoid jargon, business speak, political cliches. We can do our part to prevent lies from becoming normal, from becoming normalized, from creating this atmosphere which traps us all into these set ways of thinking. So I would say, historically speaking, Nazism, Stalinism have barely passed away. They scarred Europe for generations. The effects are still being felt. Now again, before the last people have died who suffered all of that, we seem to be sleepwalking again into something altogether too horribly familiar. It's tempting to blame a particular politician. We can hold up Trump or Le Pen or Farage, and to forget that the power they wield is only as strong as we collectively allow through our silent complicity. The fascist and communist regimes that I know best, the ones that dominated Europe in the 20th century, these relied on everyday human flaws: envy, gossip, malice, careerism, to tempt ordinary people voluntarily to police and report on one another. Ideology enabled the oppression of everyone by everyone to be justified through lofty abstractions: the Aryan race, the interests of the nation, the working class, the will of the people. Since the fault line, if I'm right, between the oppressor and the oppressed is not out there, it's within each of us, we will not change society by changing one leader for another, or even one ideology for another. Our most powerful defense as human beings against the new forms of oppression which I fear are coming is to call things by their real names and to value, always remember, actual human beings, not an abstraction. This is, I think, the only way that we can safeguard ourselves against propaganda and try to prevent it bringing out the humanity in all of us. Thank you.